So we are holding on Daf Yud Ches Amud Aleph on the about 10 lines down from the top. I just want to remind myself of what we learned yesterday to get back into the swing of it. We had another encounter with the Machlokes of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir. If a sukkah has there's a gzera, if you use wider boards, there's a gzera tikra. But here we had a Machlokes between Rav and Shmuel in the second lashon, or between Rabbah and the Medrash in the first lashon, as to whether or not 4 tefachim of sukkah possible. So let's just start from the beginning. The Mishnah talks about two issues. The Mishnah says that if you have blank space in your sukkah, so really what we're discussing is, imagine you're looking at a sukkah that has 3 walls. You're walking in through the open 4th wall. So there's a wall to your right, there's a wall to your left, and there's a wall at the back. Right? Those are the 3 walls. And halfway through the sukkah, let's say your sukkah is 20 feet long, halfway through the sukkah, there's a 3 tefach gap in the schach. The Mishnah says that severs your sukkah, because you don't say loved, which means that anything from that gap to the back is part of the 3-wall sukkah. But anything from that gap to the front is possible because it has 2 walls, but it's been severed from the back wall. That's the halacha of 3 tefachim of avir. The Mishnah also tells us halacha that if you have schach posel up to 4 amis, it will not posel. Now the Mishnah happens to express that particular inyan when the schach posel is lined up around the perimeter, and you say doifan akuma to connect to your schach kosher in the middle. But Rabbi wanted to learn that it's not about doifan akuma. Anywhere in the sukkah where you have 4 amis of schach, it'll also posel. So the same scenario. You're looking into a sukkah. You walk through the 4th side, which does not have a wall. There's 2 walls on the side, the side of the back. If there's a strip of schach in the middle, across, that's 4 amis or more, it severs the sukkah. The front half doesn't have 3 walls. However, not kosher schach. Not kosher schach, I apologize, not kosher schach. However, the other shita held, depending on who it's attributed to, Rav and Shmuel or only Shmuel, and that is, even if there's only 4 tefachim of posel schach, that's in the middle of the sukkah, it will sever the sukkah. So the halacha for amish, they say in our Mishnah, only applies to doifin akuma, which means if it's around the edge. And the question is, can you extend the walls to the kosher schach? But if it's in the middle, if it's in the middle of the sukkah, stretched across as a strip across in the schach, that will sever the sukkah in a mere 4 tefachim. That was the discussion yesterday. So now we're going to get into a similar but different discussion on Daf Yud Ches Amud Aleph at the top. So we're talking about, let's say, 10 lines down from the top. Omar Abai. 3 tefachim for Avir, 4 tefachim for Schach Posel Be'emtza, and 4 Amis for Schach Posel around the perimeter. We also learned the Chiddush in Rashi that Doifin Akuma does not mean that you take the wall and you bring it to the schach. Doifin Akuma means you use the ceiling, the posel schach that's in the ceiling, as an extension of the wall, right? And that's why Avir Shlosh Tefachim will cause a problem, because you don't have any doifin to make a kuma out of. Okay, so Amar Abaye, Avir Shloisha B'Sukkah Gedola. What happens if I had a Sukkah Gedola, which means it's more than the minimum share, and there was a blank space of 3 tefachim? So we know you don't say love it, and it severs the sukkah. But what happens if you filled it with a substance, either bein bekanim, either you filled it with kosher schach, so then for sure there's no problem because there's no more gap, or bein b'shpuden, even if you filled it with posel schach, have a miyat. It would be a miyat, because now you don't have a gap, an air gap of 3 tefachim, you have a posel schach gap of 3 tefachim, and everybody agrees that 3 tefachim of posel schach will not pass. If it's air, then you don't say love it, right? Once you hit 3 tefachim, you don't say love it, but there's a gap in the sukkah, so it severs the back and the front. Yeah. So let's see Rashi, have a miyat. So I'm in Rashi to the right. It's smack in the middle of the Haggayis and Tziyonim, if you have that on the side of your Gemara. Have a miyat. So it's to the right of where we are and a little bit down. Uksheir, that makes this sukkah kosher. The loy shir aver yesh, So you didn't even have to fill it completely with pasal eschach. Even if you just made it less than 3 tefachim with pasal eschach, it's still going to be kosher because you have neither symptom that will pasal it. You don't have aver shalish and you don't have schach arba because of that is kosher. How about basukah tana, which means sheshiyura mitumtum? You have exactly 7 and a mashu tvachim by 7 and a mashu tvachim. So you have no option to make the sukkah even a tiny bit smaller without pasal. There, but kanim have a meat. If you make it smaller with kanim, and then you say lovut, so then it's as if you have a full canopy of schach kosher, that'll work. Rashi says, Damrina lovut, then kadaver. It's as if there's no air at all. But b'shvudin, if you filled in that space, you only say lovut if it's less than 3 tvachim. Correct. And b'shvudin, but if you fill that gap with pasal eschach, with steel rods, lo have a meat. It would not be a meat. And Rashi explains, b'shvudin lo have a meat. The afal gav, the loy mizeh yeshir live soil. At the end of the day, you don't have enough air to pasal because you filled some of that airspace with pasal eschach, and you definitely don't have enough pasal eschach to cause a problem. So why is the sukkah pasal? Music Rashi. Even the ikot gimel tvachim bahadodi, the nafki mehechsher sukkah. The fact of the matter is, there's 3 tvachim missing from the sukkah. Chashivi ba'apin of shayu. They're not just bottled to the rest of the sukkah. They take on their own significance and distinction. They might not sever the sukkah, but they're definitely not going to contribute to the sukkah either. And therefore, without this little area, the less of the shear of the sukkah, you no longer have 7 in the mashu by 7 in the mashu. Zok the Gemara, the Hanamili, this halacha that we just said is minatzad. If this airspace that you filled with pasal eschach was along the edge of the sukkah. Look, Rashi, the Hanamili, the aver pachash megimel, lovud, the ena pasal sukkah. So that we say that if you minimize the space, it will be kosher. That's only if it's along the outside wall. Aval be'emtza. But what if you have, once again, the same example, you have your 3-wall sukkah. You're walking in through the open 4th wall, and there's a strip across the sukkah that's missing schach. That's not 3 tvachim, that's 2 tvachim. So Mechi asked earlier, do you say lavud even in a horizontal situation, right? This is the question now. So again, I have a 3-wall sukkah. I'm walking through the open 4th wall, and smack in the middle of the sukkah, 10 feet from the back wall, 10 feet from the front, you have a strip of airspace that's less than 3 tvachim. So normally you say lavud. The question is, do you say lavud over here? Zaktamar pligiba, Rab Achav Ravina. Rab Achav Ravina have a machoikis. Chad Omer yesh lavud be'emta. The Chad Omer ain't lavud be'emta. So horizontal lavud, that we say for sure. That we say for sure. If it's along the edge, and we're missing a tefach of schach along the edge of the sukkah, we imaginary continue the schach, we say it touches the top wall of the sukkah. But if it's in the middle of the sukkah, that's the question, you say lavud there. So one man you'll say lavud be'emta, and one man says you will not say lavud be'emta. My timer, the man Omar, what's the svara of the man who says yesh lavud be'emta? The Tanya we learned, kaira hayotze mikoisel zeh, ve'inin agas v'koisel acher. Now we know when it comes to Erevin, if you have a mavli that you make shituf from a vuyashan, you have to make some type of sign, some type of distinction. So when someone walks in the mavli, from Rosh Hashanah, he knows he's changing from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah, so he can't carry anything across that threshold, or vice versa. If he's in the mavli and he wants to walk out to the Rosh Hashanah, he has to know that he's now crossing into a Rosh Hashanah and he cannot carry anything out with him. And because of that, they have to put either a lechi or a kayu. A lechi is a vertical board up along one of the side walls of the mavli. A kayu is a horizontal board across the top of the mavli. So what happens if you had kayu hayosim mikoshel zeh? Let's say the opening of the mavli is 20 feet, and your board that you put across is 19 feet. So it's cantilevering off one side. It almost makes it to the other edge, but it's not quite there. But it's within 3 tvachim. Or you had 2 boards, one that came from the right side, and one that came from the left side, but they didn't meet each other. There's a gap in the middle, so they're both cantilevered, and they're both meeting in the middle, but they're not touching quite. The Einin Noigus zu bezu, they don't make it all the way across. But if it's pachas mishloisha, If there's less than 3 tvachim in between them, then ein noitzarach lahabi kaira achas. You don't have to bring kaira acheres. You don't have to bring another board. In other words, this board that's within 3 tvachim of where it needs to be, it will be a kosher mavli. So let's think. If we're talking about the one board that comes all the way across and almost makes it to the other side, that's not relevant to us because that's minatzad. But when you have 2 boards that are coming across the mavli and are meeting in the middle, that's called lovad be'emtza. We want to say in the middle of the roof, in the middle of the span, we'll connect the 2 koyres that are coming from each side. And it says clearly in this brisa, if it's pachas mishloisha, einay tarech lahavi koyer acheres. Shloisha tarech lahavi koyer acheres. So this is a very nice support, a very nice raya that you say lavud even in the center of a span. Let's see Rashi. Right.
Be supported going down in some fashion.
They can't, that's right. They're mounted to the top of the wall. Right.
Whereas by the sukkah, the space is truly open. There isn't any support in between. Really obvious. No,
What holds the schach on either side up?
no,
It's resting on the wall. So that's just like the mower.
But the middle is totally empty.
Well, I'm talking about my 3-wall sukkah, and I have one place across where there's no schach. Right? Oh, I'm sorry, that's not the case. It's empty. I have one place where the schach comes, meets in the middle, but doesn't get quite together.
It's totally empty.
Right. So the schach on either side of that hole is supported by the walls on the side.
But the empty space has no wall going down. But the two...
The empty space also has no wall. It's not, there's empty space there.
I don't... But according to this picture, there
Right.
isn't any support for these 2 beams going down. But that picture is like kind of impossible.
Why not? It's cantilevered. It's cantilevered. It's supported by. Oh, so you thought there was a vertical post holding them up? No, there isn't. It's cantilevered, which means it's supported by one edge and just hangs over in midair. Oh.
Whatever that thing is probably
It might go further off, otherwise it would fall off. Or they have a long bolt that tightens it. That's correct. Okay. Okay, so very good. So Zok the Heilige Gemara. Cantilevered means it's not supported on its outer edge. It's only supported by one side. Okay, so let's see what the Heilige Gemara says over here. So that's a raya that you'll say lavud be'emtza. Let me see if I can find a place over here. Okay, very good. Let's see Rashi. Koira yotze. So we're in Rashi. Koira yotze lahater amavi. You have this koira that's there to be mater amavi. Unusuna al pi roichav pesach amavi mekosher lekosher. It runs across the opening of the mavi from one wall to the other. Vizu, but this particular one, einem agas l'shnei solam. It doesn't reach both sides. It's projecting out of one side, extends across the opening, but is just short of being long enough to rest on the other side of the wall. The chain base courage, or if you have 2 cantilevers, a board initiating from either side of the mavi that meet in the middle. The al-kochach sukrashi, the emtza avir pachash megimel shloibis hamachadayfen. These two, in the second case of the base courage, it's clearly meeting in the middle, and that's an exact case of lavud b'emtza. Zok to Gemara. The idach, what is the other mandama going to do? If you hold that there is no such thing as lavud be'emtza, how do you explain why this works to be mater amavi? The idach shiny kairos derabanan. Kairos is only with derabanan. The whole requirement of making this heker mavi is a derabanan requirement. For that, we'll accept the rabbanan have a right to be makel. With their takonis, they're allowed to dictate what's good and what's not. But a wall of a sukkah, it's not up to the rabbanim to decide. You have to go by the Gzersa or the halacha l'Moshe Sinai of lavud, and we don't have a halacha l'Moshe Sinai telling us that lavud will work in the middle. Let's see Rashi. Shiny clear. The chol isur tiltul mavi the hilchas eir of the rabbanim. All of these halachas regarding the mavi are the rabbanim. The midiraisa l'baytikim. Midiraisa, everything is perfectly fine. Hilchach hikilu v'hachi. The rabbanim had the right to make this kula that the 2 beams, even if they don't meet in the middle, it'll be kosher. The Hemos Rebbe Mitiru. They were the ones who created the Isser, so they can tell you, they can dictate the terms of the Heter. Although Sukkah Deraisa, Sukkah is a Chiv Deraisa, and you like Kimlan, Lavud, Be'emtza, Allah Chalamosh B'Sinai, if we don't know for a fact that Lavud works, even in the center of a span, from the Halach Chalamosh B'Sinai, Loy Matin and Lach Shura. So you can't bring the Araya from Erevin to Sukkah because Erevin is dictated by the Rabbanan, unlike Sukkah. Okay, now let's try the other side. My time with the Mandamer ain't Lovid then. What is this for of the Mandamer who hold that you don't say Lovid in the center of his pan? It's not we learn. So the halacha is if there's a house and there's a mace in the house, the tumah spreads, and everywhere anything in that house will become tumah. If you have tumah in the house and there's someone standing on the roof, someone's fiddling on the roof, he's not tumah because the oil contains the tumah. But what if there's a skylight? There's an opening, but a skylight that's not filled with a plastic dome. It's wide open, right? It rains in through that skylight. So what if you have a skylight shebabayis, and the opening is at least a tefach, so it's let's say 6 inches by 6 inches. You have a little hole in the roof that's 6 inches by 6 inches. So then, tumah babayis kulay tumah. The halacha is it's still an oil. It didn't destroy the oil just because there's one little hole. So therefore, anything under that oil will become tumah, except if it's directly under that skylight. Mashekeneged aruba tahar. What's right under that skylight is tahar, which clearly tells you that you don't say lavud, because if you say lavud be'emtza, why don't you look at it like that's sealed up? And tumah anywhere should be. Elamai, we say even a small hole of 6 tefachim is not considered automatically closed. No, 3 tefachim. But lavud is 3 tefachim. So you have a hole of 1 tefach. A hole of 1 tefach is considered a hole.
According to this man, he wouldn't even hold that was. He said 0 lavud on
The emtza. That's right. Now, this is an interesting mishnah. Aruba shabayis and wapa seach tefach tumah bebayis kulay tamei. However, masha keneged aruba is going to be tumah. Tumah keneged aruba, but if you have a tumah that's right underneath that opening, kolabayis kulatar, because again, it's right above it. There's no oil because it's open. Now, how about ein baruba pesach tefach? What if the hole is even smaller than the tefach? So the Mishnah is going to say the halacha is exactly the same. Tumah bebayis keneged aruba tar. Tumah keneged aruba kolabayis kulay tar. So you might ask, why would the Mishnah repeat the case and say the exact same halacha? So Rashi and Tosfos had that same kasha, and not to worry, the answer is not complex. The answer is simple as can be. So let's see Rashi. Aruba Bagaki. Aruba is in the Caribbean. I mean, it's in the roof. See where my head's holding? Aruba Bagaki. A friend of mine told me he's going to Aruba this week. That's why. I don't think it's this type of Aruba, but there probably is a lot of tumah there anyway. Okay, Keneged Aruba Tahar, Kalim Shetachtea Tahir. Kalim that are directly underneath this skylight will be Tahar She'eino Oil Mace. In that location, there is no oil mace. But whatever the case is of Rashi, Alma, you see from here that Ein Lovud Be'emtza Lahamahav Kula Kisasim. You don't say that you ignore a hole up to 3 tefachim and you consider it closed. Could you imagine if you could say one little leak? It's Lovud. You got to pay me anyway. Kol habayis kulay tar. If the tumah is right under the window, she'ein mahal al tumah klum. If the tumah is right underneath that skylight, so there is no oil above the tumah, so the tumah will not spread throughout that structure. Ein baruba pesach tefach tumah bebayis keneged aruba tar tumah keneged aruba kol bayis kulay tar. So the question is the Seifa says exactly the same halacha. It's just that the hole is even smaller. Zokt Rashi, Seifa Gersin Keresha. Don't think it's a mistake. In fact, the Seifa says the same halacha as the Reisha. So what is the repeat for? Zokt Rashi, if you read the Mishnayos there and analyze it more, you'll realize that Uvidvar Macherim Yesh B'neim Chilek the Mishnah Doilas. When the Mishnah continues, the Mishnah does say, however, there are differences between them that are not part of the scope of our sugya today. Here, the Gemara doesn't quote the full halachas. And this is the beginning of that pair. So we only quoted what's relevant to us. So it's very interesting to note, because I always share with the Olam a rule that whenever you bump into Tahiris, since there's no specific sugya of Tahiris, the Gemara always elaborates on it, because where else are we going to learn it? So I just want to look into Tosfos for a second. Tosfos at the side has the same Dibra Mashal. Ein baruba pesach tavach, tumah bebayis, keneged aruba tar, tumah keneged aruba kol bayis kol tar. The Sefer Gersin Kiresha, just like Rashi. And it would var machem yesh b'neim chiluk. Now look at this. Here, the Gemara doesn't bring the entire brayta. Shederech HaGemara lekatzer Mishnah shall say the tires. When the Gemara quotes a Mishnah from say the tires, the Gemara keeps it to a minimum. We only pull out what we need. We don't want to confuse the viewer, so we only pull out what we need. So I guess I need a little clarity in what they talk about, what they do elaborate on, what they don't elaborate on. It's an interesting point that Toshis makes.
Yes, maybe the Mishnah is, if you know, is written, this is written to that, they need pass it on, but in tomorrow.
But any additional information they elaborate on. I hear. Okay, very good. Now I've tried on Shver Toshis.
Huh?
Now I've tried on Shver Toshis. It's a beautiful shot. It's simple and it's true. Okay. Zok the Gemara weiter. Now the idach. What about the mandamer who hold that you do say love it? How do you explain why that small opening is considered a breach? Shiny hilchas tumah dachigimir lahu. Tumah is also halacha l'moshe b'sinai. And who said that the halacha l'moshe b'sinai by tumah is the same halacha l'moshe b'sinai by sukkah? They have two different sets of rules, so you can't bring me a raya. Let's see Rashi hachigimir lahu b'sinai. They ain't loved be'emtza. Umei halacha lo ygamrin imidi achriti elahu ditmer bei. The halacha l'moshe b'sinai stated regarding tumah is exclusive to tumah. It doesn't necessarily apply to sukkah. They'll have two independent halacha l'moshe b'sinai. So we're left here with a machlokes as to whether or not you say lavud in the center of a span. Dorish Rabbi Yehuda Bar Eloi. Rabbi Yehuda Bar Eloi darshan. Bayis shenifchas v'sikich al gabav sheira. Right? This was our Mishnah. Of course, the limitation is that your schach has to be within 4 amas of each of the 3 walls. Amar lefanav Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yosy. Rabbi Prish. Rabbi explain, elaborate a little bit. Prish is the Berecha. The Rashi says, give us some more insight. You're not clarifying things. So this is how Abba was mafarish the conditions of this kula. There is a limit to this concept of doif nakuma, and that's 4 amas, like we learned. Dorish Rabbi Yehuda Bar Eloi, abruma is a type of fish. Rashi says, again, it's the second wide line in Rashi, min dogum katanim, then shrotzim nikorim behem. They're small fish, and it's very hard to detect shrotzim in that fish, and therefore you can't eat them. Or I'm not sure if that's what it means, or if what it means is it's a small fish and sometimes mixed in amongst them. Not that the shrotzim in their skin. I think it means mixed amongst them. You might find a sheretz, a trefa fish, nevertheless avruma shari, because we don't have to be concerned that there's any tome fish mixed in with these fish. Once again, Rabbi Prish, explain to me why is avruma always kosher? How do I why don't I have to check to make sure there's other fish mixed? Asura shall not employ new teres. It all depends on where you catch these fish. Depending on where you catch them, sometimes you can assume they're all kosher fish in your net, and sometimes you have to examine them. Let's see Rashi. In a river where we know there's many species of non-kosher fish that could get mixed in with your catch. And since they're so small, it's very difficult to distinguish between the kosher fish and non-kosher fish. There, you shouldn't use these avruma fish. But if we know it's a river that will not support the growth of non-kosher fish, then you can assume any fish you catch in it is kosher. It's similar to something that Abaye said. Hi tzachnasa, the bav and the hara. The tzachnasa fish, Rashi, it's also a small type of fish, from the river Bav. It was a river that was called Bav. My time, it's sure it's going to be mutter to use. Then you don't need to worry that there's any shrotzim mixed in with your catch. My time, if you're going to say, because it's a rapidly flowing river. And in a rapidly flowing river, dak tome and a trefa fish. Given the leslichut shedra, trefa fish are like shellfish that don't have a spinal cord, right? They don't have a spine. They don't have bones inside. Their bone structure is the outside shell. So given the leslichut shedra, since they don't have a chut shedra, or maybe like jellyfish, they don't have a spine and a bone structure. They're not able to withstand the strong currents of a river. So that's how we know that the fish in this river have to be kosher. But that's simply not true. We see many times in rapidly running rivers that these trefa fish could survive. Ella, the reason why the tzachnosa from Bab Nahara are kosher is mishum the malichi maya. It's because it's saltwater river. It's a salty river. The haidak tome and a fish that's non-kosher, even the less like kilfi, since it doesn't have scales, because scales is one of the symptoms of a kosher fish. Lematzika, you cannot repel the salt. It's going to get messed up. So that's how we know there's no tray for fish in this river. Gemara, once again, there's many fish that live in salt water that are not kosher. Ella, the only reason why you can say that the tzachanasa fish is going to be mutter from the river Bav is mishum the loy marbetina dakame. Because we know for a fact that the soil in this river simply cannot support. I don't know what the reason is, but for some reason it cannot support tray for fish, and that's why you can assume any tzachanasa that you find in Bav Nahara, you're allowed to keep.
Yeah.
Because we wanted an explanation as to details as to when Doifin Akuma applies, when it doesn't. So Aman Damar said something vague, and we asked for clarification. So the Gemara now brought a list of other things that someone said vague. Okay, so let's see. Tzachnasa is mindagam tadim. The Bav Nahar Hanar Bav Shemoy Redifim Maya Kalois from the Maris Loris. They're rapidly running rivers. Chut Ashedra Noisin Koyach Ba'adam. You know, they say grow a spine when someone has no strength. So that's where it comes from. The spine gives someone backbone, strength. Its spine stands strong. You see that the common harais in many rivers, these fish without backbones seem to survive nicely. Or doing the name. Kilfi is kashkashim. It's the scales that protect it from salt. But the real reason was like mirbu tinau dakam ain't titch nor. For some reason, the mud in the banks of this river is not magdil umatrish skotzen for a mushroom. Somehow, the mud at the bottom of the riverbed, will not support non-kosher fish, and that's why we know it's allowed. However, Dr. Gemara, Amar Abida Idna, but nowadays that we divert, it seems that they must have diverted two rivers to spill into the Narbava. The Shafchi Nahar Esan, Unagam de Lahasam, those two rivers are full of tray for fish, and now they drain into Nahar Bav. Therefore, any fish you catch now could be tummy. Therefore, asira. So, idna the Shafchi Nahar Esan Unagam de Lahasam asira. Zakra Ashiba idna. So Husvula Soicha and Achshav, they were diverted. These two rivers that do have tray for fish were diverted into the Nahar Bav. They megat and Scotzen. It's going to be asir. Okay, that's the end of our diversion spiel, and then we're back into Sukkah. Eitmar, right Gemara Shaila. The Gemara wanted to quote a machlokes. Sikech. Now let's just stop a second. We learned our Mishnah that said if you put schach on an achsadra, right? If the achsadra around is more than 4 amos, you don't say doifin akuma. If it's less than 4 amos, you do say doifin akuma. Now we have a machlokes. Sikech hagabe achsadra sheyesh lo ptzimin. This achsadra is achsadra the way Chaim Tzvi visualized it. That the end of the porches aren't freestanding, hanging off the wall. There were actually posts underneath the outer tip of these porches to support them. So if you have a series of posts, vertical posts, that are supporting the porch all the way around. So yesterday I used it as an example. Everyone knows the layout of the Beis Yaakov High School building. There's a courtyard in the middle where the entrance is. And then there's the north wing, the south wing, and the east wing. Right? It's shaped in a ches. So I said, imagine if Beis Yaakov High School built a porch all the way around the 3 walls, and the porch was less than 4 amos, and they put schach across it, and they took a big rebbe came to town, and they had a big rebbe shesukah in that courtyard. That's exactly what we're discussing. The big rebbe shesukah. So the Mishnah said, if the porch, the rim around, is less than 4 amos, you say doifin akuma, and the wall of the buildings, the 3 walls of the building, will act as the wall of the sukkah. Now the Gemara wants to know what happens if those posts aren't just held by being connected to the wall of the building. You put a series of posts. So those posts now could form a wall. Sheretz kosher. And Rashi tells us, of course, we're talking about when there is not a lot of space in between the posts, so you say lovud. So there's a series of columns all the way around, and then you have a good wall. But if there's no posts, and you just have your porch all the way around without any type of wall or rim, and it's more than 4 amos, Abai says it will be kosher, and Rava says it will be kosher. So before I got anywhere, I mamish got stuck over here. How could I argue with the Mishnah? The Mishnah says if it's more than 4 amas, it's possible. Right? So I was struggling with this. I'm learning the Gemara, and maybe the Gemara will ask me. I learned an extra block. Nobody, I'm getting stuck. So then I got stuck. So I went to the Shlomo Chakon and I said, "Did you ever learn Sukkah before?" What's the the Mishnah? It was the next line in the Gemara. It's right here. So the Gemara is going to ask how that's simple to our Mishnah. Okay, so let's see what this case is. Sikach al gabe achsadra sheyesh la petzim. Dr. Helig Arash. It's the same structure that we discussed in our Mishnah. You have a chater that has a porch around it, and I use the example of, let's say, Beis Yaakov High School, where they put a rim around it, like a porch all the way around it, that you hung the schach of. The sikech ba'avir shel chater, and you put schach over the center of the courtyard. The somach haschach al svas hakiroi shel achsadra, and you lean the schach on either side on the projections, the porches that were sticking out all the way around. The ein mechitzas hapnimiyos ma'ilos l'sukkah yesh betikras achsadra yosh marbamas. You can't use the walls of the building to act as the walls of your sukkah because there's more than 4 amas, so you no longer say like an akuma. Aval atzara sukkah, but there's one important piece of information that we're going to add is that on the sukkah side of these porches, so the outer edge of these porches, yesh lachsadra psimin, which are amudim. You have a series of columns that support all of these porches. Kimin chaloinos. It looks like windows because if you have a whole series of columns, in between those columns, you have like long, thin windows that you could look out of the sukkah from. Uveinein, this is key. Uveinein pachos from shloisha. Since there's not 3 tefachim in between each of these columns, so it's as if it's a solid wall. Sheir it's kosher. Tamrin b'hulavud, you say lavud. So then for sure it's kosher. However, what if you don't have that? So back to the case of our Mishnah, Abai says it will be kosher anyway, which is a big mystery as to why. The Rav Amar Ptula, Rav said it'll be possible, which makes sense that corresponds with our Mishnah. So Abai Amar Kshir. Why does Abai say it's kosher? Zok to Gemara, because Amrinon Pi Tikra Yorid V'Soisim. The edge of the porch is not paper thin, right? The edge of the porch is probably 6 inches thick concrete, right? It's probably very thick. So there is already a vertical surface. So we say that small vertical surface, that's a tefach, continues down, you make believe it comes down to the floor. So it's almost like a good achas type of thing. It's like a good achas. You have one tefach of wall, of barrier, and we'll bring it down. I don't know. But this is not good achas. This is pitikra. It's a new halacha l'mashmishinai. So let's see Rashi. I'm reading on pitikra. Yours doesn't be kol tzad. From all 3 sides, you say pitikra. This is very much, there's a very long Toshus here that disputes Rashi. It starts on Yud Ches Amud Aleph and it goes all the way down over here. Toshus argues with Rashi, but we'll learn with Rashi shot. I'll just tell you why Toshus doesn't like Rashi shot. So you have 3 sides of porches, and there's some face to the edge of the porch, it's like a tefach thick. So we make believe that those walls go down. Rav Amar Psula, because Lo Yamin Pitikra Yored V'Soisim. Rav holds, I don't hold to that. I don't hold to that. And Rashi says, Kedim Afaris Time Alakamei, the Gemara is going to explain shortly why Rav doesn't hold it. So I'm like Rav Labai. Rav asked about it. Lididach, the Amrit Pitikra Yored V'Soisim. You do hold of this special kula of Pitikra Yored V'Soisim. I want to know how far do you take this? How far do you take this? Now we're talking about an enclosed courtyard that has 3 walls. Would you also agree and say such a thing? What if there was only 2 walls, one on either side? Would you also say this concept of Pitikra Yored V'Soisim? So let's see Rashi. Pitikra Sachsadra Yored V'Soisim. Tema hachanami b'sukkah hasuya b'emsa chater. What happens if you didn't have a sukkah that was in a courtyard like this, that was surrounded on 3 sides from a nice building? Rather, you made such a sukkah smack in middle of your backyard, and you had 4 posts holding up a frame that was holding up your schach, but the frame had a thickness to it. Let's say your frame was 4 6x6s, you had a 6x6 frame and then 4 6x6 posts holding up the frame, and then on top of it you had schach. So would you say Pitikra Yored V'Soisim there? Tema hachanami b'sukkah asuya b'emsa chater u'mesuchach b'nesar mavim. Correct. When it has walls, it has pitikra walls, virtual walls. That's right. No real walls. That's right. And it had thick beams for the schach. They're not 4 tvachim is that they're 4 tvachim, then it's going to be possible for a different reason. The nifkas doifenem tzai. What happens if there was no middle wall? Ushnaim shemikan umikan kayomim. So you have 2 walls, one on either side. So that wall, here about the schach. So he wants to know, you have a sukkah and you're missing 2 walls. You have 2 walls and you're missing. Here, in our case, you actually have 3 walls in a building. But here you have only 2 walls. And the 2 end wall and the 2 walls that you have are not kitty corner, they're 2 parallel walls. So it's a direct walk-through. You can walk right through it from end to end. So he wants to know, Rabbi wants to know, would you agree to the concept of P-Tikr in such a case? So Rabbi's question to Abai was, would you also say that this sukkah is kosher using P-Tikra? The Tema Ba, P-Tikra Yored Decisive? And you would also agree, would you agree there that you say P-Tikra? Zokt Abai, that's pushing it too far. Omer Lei, so Abai responded to Rava, Madina Lach Bahi, there I would agree to you, the Havale Kamavi Hamafulish. It's like a Mavi Mafulish, since it's wide open, you walk right through it. Just like by a Mavi Mafulish, we don't allow you just to use one little kayer there. So to here, I wouldn't rely on Peter. Let's see Rashi. Medina Lach Bahi, the Kivan the Aver Pesuch Lenegdai, since it's open on both ends, you can walk right through it. Dam Yalamavi Mafulish, Vashi Lakapandria Lubakias Marabim. That means it's made to walk through. So we can't consider something a barrier, a wall, if it's very simple to walk right through. Okay, so let's see the Gemara here. Lema Abaye v'Rava beplukta the Rabba Shmuel. Let's suggest that this machlokes between Abaye and Rava as to whether or not you say Pitikra Yorik V'Soisim is totally in another machlokes that we're going to quote from Rav and Shmuel. Let's see Rashi. Lema Abaye v'Rava. Because at the time of the Rava, at this point, the Gemara is assuming that the reason why Rava doesn't hold the Pitikra is because the Kasavar B'Cha Doifin or B'Shnayim Amrin and Yorik V'Soisim. Rava holds a Pitikra. The question is, he says you can only apply it to 1 or 2 walls, but you can't apply it to all 3 walls. So right now, that's what the Gemara thinks the machlokes is. Abaya holds you can say Pitikra on all 4 walls or 3 walls. You just can't say it by a Mavi Mafulish. And Rava holds you could only say it for 1 wall. Okay, so 2 walls, then you're right. Huh? You're right. So Rava says, because at the time of the Rava, I'm sorry? It has, Rava says it would have to be, no, Abai says it has to be kitty corner. That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Rava would say, I don't say it only by...
You need, Abai holds you need to have, well, so you're bringing up a good question. You're bringing up a good question. Because if you have on 3 walls, if you can say it on 3 walls, you're saying, and by definition, it's going to be a Mavi Mafulish as well, right? So Rashi has that problem. This is the source of where the difference between Tosfos and Rashi. So Rashi says a svar as follows: the discussion between Abai and Rava was in the case of a building like Mishakav High School, right? There, Rashi held that Abai holds you say particularly on all 3 sides. You know why? Because it's not Mafulish, because of the building. Even though the building's walls are not being used as the walls of the sukkah, right? When you're using P-Tikra on all 3 sides, right? So Rashi says the reason why Abai holds is good there is because technically you can't get through. There's a wall in the way, even though those walls are not part of the sukkah. But if that same scenario occurred in your backyard, there even Abai would hold that you can't do it on 3 walls. But the way Rashi is learning is in the case where there were the 3 walls of the Mishakav High School, Rava holds you can only say P-Tikra on 1 of the 3 walls, and Abai said you can say it on all of the 3 walls. So the reason why Tosfos doesn't like that svara is because Lagabi the sukkah itself, the walls of the building are completely irrelevant. So why should you say that makes it Ois Mavi Mafulish? Tosfos uses the word that Rashi's svara is absurd. It's absurd. That's the Rashi's, and I'm going to actually point to you. Tosfos, the first wide line of Tosfos. I'm just going to show it says, Mishum dahai dami tfei l'mavi mafulosh ma'hai u'svara mishunahi. It's a weird svara. That's what Tosfos says about Rashi's distinction, using the building, which technically is not even part of the sukkah, to act as something that stops them from being closed. So let's see the story here. So you brought up a good point. So Dr. Gemara here. Lema Abaye v'Rabba b'plukta the Rav Shmuel from the Pluk. And Rashi says, what is the shaila? The shaila is if you say pei tikra on one side, or if you can say it on multiple sides. Where Rabba says you say it on one side, Abaye says you can say it on multiple sides. Itmar, hachsadra b'bika. What if you have this type of sukkah in middle of an open field? In other words, it's not up against any wall. So you have 4 posts, just to visualize it, you have 4 posts that are 6 by 6 vertical sleepers, and there's a frame above them, and you have your schach on top of the frame with no walls. Rav Omar, mutter l'talta b'kula. You're allowed to carry in that area. We say it's considered a Rosh Hashanah because it's like it has 4 walls. Damrina pitikra yard b'saisim. We say that the front surface of each of these 4 beams on the frame, they create an imaginary wall that extend down, and therefore you're allowed to carry there. That's not considered a fenced-off area. It's like Rosh Hashanah, and therefore you cannot move more than 4 amas. You cannot carry anything more than 4 amas. The loy amrinon pitikra yard b'saisim. So let's see Rashi. Bebika. Why did the case quoted mention that it's not bika? It's only because we don't want you to think that it's this structure was mounted up against one of the walls of your house. It's a freestanding structure. Yeah. In other words, there's no houses there. No, if it was in your backyard, maybe it's in your backyard, but it's connected to your house. If it's in the valley, it's a completely freestanding structure. Freestanding. And that's what Rashi says. Since there's no house anywhere near there, it doesn't even have one wall. You never make walls on a nachsadra. A standalone nachsadra gazebo will never have walls. But sometimes, if it's in your backyard, you'll set up the gazebo right up against the wall of your house. And if you do that, then so when you have one wall, all bets are off. This machlokes is only when there are no walls to it. So Shmuel said, "Ein metaltu," because lo yamrin pitikra yerd b'saisim. The time of Mefarish Be'ervin, the Gemara in Erevin explains why Shmuel says this. The Arba Defanis Leslie. He holds that you cannot say pitikra if you have to use it for all 4 walls. If it had even one wall, like if it was up against the wall of your house, then he would agree that Isla Yorid Mesaisim Bachrenaisa on the other 3 walls. So that's the machlokes. If you have a freestanding structure with no solid walls at all, do you say pitikra? Shmuel says no, and Rav says yes. So we want to suggest name Abaye Karav or Rabbi Shmuel. Abaye holds you say pitikra even if it's on all 3 walls, right? And Rabbi, who says you don't take pitikra, might hold like Shmuel. Zok to Gemara, not necessarily. Aliba de Shmuel kulu amalekri. According to the Shmuel, you could say that everybody agrees. What does that mean? Shmuel said that you don't say pitikra yard besides. So let's see Rashi. Aliba de Shmuel kulu amalekri kach pirush sugyazu. This is how we explain this sugya. B'chol mokim sheyachal lahamay divrei echad mehem shaloi b'machlokus shalacherim. Anytime we could possibly justify that either Abaye or Rava could hold like both Rav and Shmuel, it's better, right? Nobody wants to be totally in someone else's machlokes. We want to always say that each Amoira can agree with both of the 2 svaras. So we're going to do that. And this we find many times through Shas where we try to be totally one machlokes Amoraim and the machlokes Tanaim. And the Gemara says, according to one man Damar, yes, he's stuck. He can only say is halacha like one of the 2 Tanoim. But the other man Damar could agree with both Tanoim. So that's what we're trying to say as well. So leave it to Shmuel, Vadai Kidikam. The way Shmuel says that you do not say Pitikra Yored B'Saisim, I'd have to agree with you. The Rava L'chudei Hu Amar Shmuel. Only Rava holds like Shmuel. So I misspoke when I read the Gemara. Only Rava holds like Shmuel. Abaye cannot hold like Shmuel. Abaye ain't yachal hamador for Shmuel. Abaye cannot fit in like Shmuel because Abaye said that you do say Pitikra Yored B'Saisim even if there's no walls. It's because he said it. He said it by all 3 walls in the case of our Achsadra. So he cannot agree with Shmuel. This is not going to work. Of course, Abaye would say that Shmuel would hold that it's possible. I can't say my kula for sukkah according to Shmuel Shita, because the mala in Shabbos, madachli in Shabbos, the mechitza is pitikra lechalal achsadra. What is the purpose of these walls in the gazebo. Clearly, even the imaginary walls are designed to contain the area inside that achsadra. So Madach on Shabbos, where the purpose of these walls are to contain the inside of the achsadra, it makes sense that the walls of the achsadra are servicing the inside of the achsadra. Shatikra l'tzarech achsadra nasis. This ceiling that you made on the gazebo was made to service the achsadra, clearly. So therefore, it's logical to say that its walls, its imaginary walls, also service the achsadra. Nevertheless, so there's so much logic to say that in fact those walls of Pitikra should work because the framework was designed for these achsadra. So the virtual walls that are generated from the framework should also work to enclose this achsadra. Nevertheless, Shmuel didn't allow us to use this mile of simas Pitikra. In our case, with the achsadra that was built around the building, the achsadra and the walls were not made l'shem sukkah. The purpose of the imaginary wall that we would extend down from these porches would be designed to contain the inside of the porches, not the outside. Normally, any barrier that you make is to service the inside of what's in the barrier. And therefore, so surely Abaya, who's Mako by Sukkah, for sure cannot be consistent with Shmuel, because there's no way Shmuel would accept those barriers of Pitikra. They're not even servicing the area that we need them to service. So leave the Shmuel Kul Amalai Pligi that there's a machlokes. Abaya cannot fit in like Shmuel.
The Sadr was outside.
No, we're talking about an Achsadra, even if it's not used for a Sukkah. We're talking about Shabbos here, right? So it's logical to say that if you use the imaginary walls to extend down from the four beams of the Achsadra, those imaginary walls would be designed to contain what's in the Achsadra. Because they're framed, the whole frame is for the Achsadra. It's an Achsadra. You made a gazebo because you want to be inside it, right? So any imaginary walls are also designed to shelter what's inside it. But when you have those four balconies, if you create an imaginary barrier, the imaginary barrier of those balconies is the barrier to the balcony from there and towards the building, right, not towards the outside. Right. So Abai says, if I don't even say Pitikra, when my imaginary barrier is designed for my structure that I'm looking to enclose, I surely won't use the imaginary walls to contain something that's not even within my structure. That's what the Gemara is telling, and therefore Abaya could not possibly agree with Shmuel. He pligi aliba de Rav. The whole question is according to Rav. Rav, who by Shabbos does agree to be Tikra Yored V'Soisim, what would he hold by Sukkah? Abaya Karav. Abaya says the same way Rav allows the Tikra Yored V'Soisim to work for Shabbos. If you have a gazebo in the middle of a field, you can carry inside that gazebo. By Sukkah as well, you will say Tikra and you'll carry it there. But Rava Amar, Rava will say, why did Rava allow you to use the imaginary walls of the gazebo? Is because the walls, the frame, it was made for the achsadra, for the interior of that achsadra, so the imaginary walls can service what they were built for. But the imaginary walls of the achsadra that goes around the courtyard, they weren't made to enclose the courtyard, they were made to enclose the achsadra. Therefore, we would not allow you to use them as walls for sukkah. And I guess we could stop there. So you brought up a very important point, and that's a beautiful point that you brought up, which is really Tosfos' problem with Rashi. That how could Rashi say that this is an enclosed area because of a building when the building really has no shaykhs? So Tosfos actually learns that the machlokes and Abai and Rava is where in fact there were two walls built. If you look at a picture book, you'll see according to Tosfos, when there's actually the shiloh was the two walls built, and you're using the Pitikra for the third wall. And so he learns the whole sugya differently. It's a long Tosfos, but even in Tosfos, with his pshat, he says, my pshat is still shver because of other sugyas. So I'm sticking to Rashi because it's the simplest pshat, even though it has its difficulties.